Perfect. Good morning and welcome to this public meeting of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission. Before we begin our one agenda item today, I'd like to take a moment to welcome our newest commissioner here this morning. I'd like to welcome Commissioner Peter A. Feldman. Commissioner Feldman joined the Commission late last week, and we are very pleased to have him here. Commissioner Feldman most recently served as Senior Counsel to the United States Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. He previously served on the legislative staff of Senator Mike DeWine of Ohio. He received his B.A. cum laude from Colgate University, which means he's hardy. Comes from our neck of the woods. And his J.D. cum laude from American University's Washington College of Law. I'm honored to welcome Commissioner Feldman as part of our CPSC family. Thank you. Glad to have you here. We have one item on our agenda this morning, and that is a decisional matter on the fiscal year 2019 operating plan. This morning, to begin with, we have our staff members here in the event there are any further questions in this opening round. With us this morning are Mr. Jay Hoffman, Mr. James Baker, Dr. George Borlace, and Mr. Dwayne Ray. Thank you all for being here this morning, not only for answering questions last week at the briefing, but all week long to get us here today. We will begin with questions for staff from the commissioners. Each commissioner will have 5-minute rounds for questions, and we can go multiple rounds if necessary. Following questions for staff, we will then turn to the consideration of the FY 2019 operating plan. I, this morning, do not have any further questions for staff. Commissioner Adler?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Kay?
None, thank you.
Commissioner Bialko?
None, thank you.
Commissioner Feldman?
None, thank you.
Oh, you can all take a deep breath. Thank you all very much for being here and for your willingness to answer any questions we may have had. Thank you. I will now turn to the FY 2019 operating plan as proposed by staff, as well as any amendments to the ops plan as it was proposed. I will begin by offering a manager's amendment. And for the sake of convenience and in the spirit of compromise, there are 5 amendments. We made some late-minute changes, so I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. There are 5 amendments that have been combined into this manager's amendment. Commissioner Adler and Commissioner Kay have generated these ideas, and all 5 offices worked extremely well together, worked diligently to develop language that we could all support. At this time, I would like to offer Commissioner Adler and then Commissioner Kay 3 minutes each to explain their portions of the manager's amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment is amendment number 5 as part of the manager's amendment. First of all, I want to welcome my colleague Peter to the Commission. He's proved to be a delightful and witty and thoughtful person, and I look forward to working with you. And I also want to thank staff for some really excellent work. My amendment, I'm just going to read because it's very short. The Executive Director shall allocate 1 additional full-time employee to support the voluntary standards activity and coordination work in EXHR. In addition to providing support for ongoing voluntary standards activities, this FTE shall assist the voluntary standards coordinator in an ongoing assessment of the Commission's voluntary standards activities and future needs of the voluntary standards program. The additional FTE will be funded by reducing the funding in Project 23704 Nanotechnology to account for the additional FTE. Budget Table 2 shall be updated to reflect the offset in nanotechnology and EXHR's FTE of 160 and the total FTE to 539. Briefly stated, I propose to have the Commission add an extra FTE to the operating plan for voluntary standards coordination. Given that we have only 1 extremely talented staff person, but only 1 dedicated to the work of voluntary standards, I believe the need for additional resources is manifest and long overdue. As a starting point, I remind my colleagues that the Congress and Commission have been expanding the work and responsibilities of voluntary standards at CPSC over the years, beginning with the change in the law that requires the Commission to work closely with the voluntary standards sector before we can write a mandatory standard. In particular, I note that the amendments in 2008, the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, added considerable authority and requirements to our voluntary standards responsibilities, which means that for durable infant products and the voluntary standard F963, both of these are becoming mandatory standards after having been fully vetted as voluntary standards. This is an office that is really weighted down with responsibility. As of the 2019 operating plan, the number of voluntary standards under consideration to varying degrees by the Commission is 74. Just to stay on top of these activities, let alone providing them with meaningful input and useful data, is an extraordinary challenge. We all know what an extraordinary job Patty Edwards does as our voluntary standards coordinator. I see her in the office, in the room, and I'm sure I'm embarrassing her. She has really taken this position and elevated its visibility and its reach, but she needs more help. I note that the Commission has recently added a professional FTE slot to our Small Business Ombudsman office, bringing this office up to 3 professional staff, a step that I particularly applaud. I see our SBO here. But along the same lines, I think we also need to add resources to our Voluntary Standards Office to keep up with its growing number of duties and responsibilities. And I thank all my colleagues for working with me.
Thank you, Commissioner Kaye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome as well to Commissioner Feldman. Very much looking forward to working with you. Thank you as well to staff, particularly the Office of the Executive Director, for all of the assistance during the past week. And thank you to the acting chair for working out getting some of these items into the manager's amendment. I'm pleased that some of our suggestions to further transparency and provide additional data to the public were incorporated to some extent into a manager's amendment by the acting chair. I'm hopeful that this is a good sign of things to come and that we can continue to work collaboratively to find common ground and compromise. The manager's amendment includes the following changes to the operating plan, or proposed changes. First, with respect to window coverings, we propose that the mandatory standards chart be revised to DATR, which stands for Data Analysis Technical Review, to reflect that there is still ongoing work at the staff level being done on standards-related efforts. So that's only to reflect the current work, not to make any changes. Second, we propose that the operating plan include a status report on staff's work on the Internet of Things in fiscal year 2019. With the rapidly approaching or increasing popularity and complexity of Internet-connected devices, the CPSC must have a clear plan with timelines and deliverables to get ahead of any emerging hazards within our jurisdiction. In addition, product designers need to be aware of the capabilities of every component of their final product and predict unintentional uses and intentional misuses that could lead to foreseeable hazardous conditions. This agency, the CPSC, is in a unique position to provide them with that guidance. And while I'm supportive of us continuing to work with stakeholders and coordinating with other agencies on these issues, I don't believe that work alone is a path forward, nor does it provide much transparency for the public into what our agency is doing. Therefore, we've asked at a minimum for a status report from staff in 2019 outlining their current progress on IoT-related work. Although it was not included in the manager's amendment, I've also asked staff to provide any associated timelines for future work, including, if possible, a possible list of strategies for preventing potential safety issues. I'm pleased that my colleagues are supportive of a status report, and I'm hopeful that staff will have an opportunity to go above and beyond the plain language of this amendment and, if possible, provide us with some additional concrete deadlines and objectives. And in the meantime, because this issue is of such great import, I think to the Commission, my office is going to accelerate work that we've been doing, working with some of the stakeholders who appeared at our hearing on IoT, to try to at least put out for public comment some IoT-related guidance to keep this conversation going. And finally, in this manager's amendment, with regard to fast track and recall effectiveness programs, we also propose that compliance staff provide the Commission with summaries of their evaluation of the fast track program and their plan to improve recall effectiveness, and so that we can make that the agency would make that public. I believe these summaries will bring important transparency to this work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second for this amendment? I second. Having heard a second, we will now move to consider the manager's amendment. Each commissioner will have 5 minutes each to discuss the amendment, and I will begin. I plan to support Commissioner Adler's amendment, which heretofore was separate from the manager's amendment, so now it is in the manager's amendment. I think it's important to realize the trend that is occurring here at the agency, and that is a lot of our work now is done in the voluntary standards arena. As reflected from the 2018 to the 2019 Ops Plan, we've seen an increase of 22 staff months. So that was in the Ops Plan prior to Commissioner Adler's amendment. So I do think that there is much work to be done, particularly with regards to any emerging technology and all of the new, what I'll call the new frontier of issues that are out there waiting for us to make sure we understand them and that we are taking the appropriate steps to make sure there are appropriate standards in place. While Commissioner Adler and I may have different policy views on voluntary standards, I think where we both agree is this is a critical work of the agency. By supporting this amendment, I hope to see the opportunity to advance the current work of our voluntary standards coordinator, as well as explore other voluntary standards work, such as emerging technologies, that it could impact our consumer safety. Commissioner Adler.
First, I want to thank Acting Chairman Burkle for her willingness to compromise. As I've said before, and I'm proud to say it, I'm a serial compromiser, and I'm delighted that my colleagues are willing to work with me. It came down to the wire this morning, and again, I thank my colleagues for being so accommodating. To some mild extent, I believe we have differing visions about the work that's done with voluntary standards, but as I was saying to Commissioner Feldman this morning, sometimes you can have a bitter disagreement in the abstract, and then when it comes to something concrete, you say, oh, fine. And I have a feeling that we may be able to do that. I also want to thank my colleague, Commissioner Kay, for also being accommodating and working with the acting chair and the other commissioners' offices with respect to his amendments. I know these are not framed precisely the way he would like, but again, that's the nature of compromise. And I have to say that I am thrilled to be at a commission where the degree of civility and courtesy that we show one another is so high, and I got to thank the acting chair for that. Thank you for setting such a good role model. I know it hasn't been easy at times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kay.
No further comment. I plan to support the manager's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Biocco.
I also support the manager's amendment on all 5 points. I'll admittedly say that I was the last holdout this morning on Commissioner Adler's amendment, not because I don't agree with the concept. I agree with the concept in full. In fact, I think that the voluntary standards program here at the CPSC should be expanded even beyond just one FTE. My concern was that we were just adding a person without enough description, and I wasn't sure that was actually going to accomplish what our joint goal was, but Commissioner Adler helped me out with that, and so I look forward to working together to make sure that our voluntary standards program continues to be and becomes even more robust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Feldman.
Thank you. I, too, am inclined to support the manager's amendment in the Adler language in the managers because I recognize the resource demands that are associated with the agency's increased focus on voluntary standards. I am concerned that the amendment as drafted falls short in terms of specifics, particularly with respect to the job description. I think it would be inappropriate for this position to function as an advocate for special interests, nor do I think this office should exercise any undue influence to steer voluntary standards beyond where consensus exists. But I do see value in investing in the Commission's voluntary standards operations, particularly so that staff can share its technical expertise. While the operating plan may not be the appropriate document to go into that level of granularity, I would like to see that I'd like to ultimately see in the job description. I think this is a conversation that we continue to work on, and with that, you've got my support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Feldman. Before we vote on this manager's amendment, I do want to just offer a technical change to item number 5 that is Commissioner Adler's proposed amendment to the manager's, well, to the ops plan, but it says the executive director shall reallocate, and that should say the executive director should allocate. So a technical change if there are no objections from the commissioners. Thank you all very much. With no further comments, we will now vote on the manager's amendment. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Kaye?
Yes.
Commissioner Biacco?
Yes.
Commissioner Feldman?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Not used to saying this. The yeas are 5, the nays are 0. The manager's amendment has been passed. Are there any additional amendments to the FY19 Ops Plan?
I have an amendment, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaye, I will recognize you for your amendment. I will ask you to describe it for up to 3 minutes, and then after the conclusion of that, I will ask for a second. Commissioner
Thank you,
Kaye.
Madam Chair. I'm hoping that this one will similarly be unanimous. Get on a roll here. The amendment that I'm offering is in furtherance of additional transparency and data going to the public, and this would expand the current annual report that the agency does on all-terrain vehicles to include ROVs as well, recreational off-highway vehicles, and it would be retabbed an off-highway vehicle report and just have 2 separate sections. And this amendment proposes to add death and injury data for recreational off-highway vehicles, also known as side-by-sides, to the Commission's existing annual death and injury report for all-terrain vehicles. At least one study has suggested that ROV sales have quadrupled from 2000 to 2015, and that fatal crashes have increased drastically. Publishing more data on ROVs would be an important first step in better understanding the hazards and evaluating trends associated with these products. And by the way, ROVs, ATVs, this product class happens to be the deadliest class of products that we regulate. At a basic level, adding ROVs to our existing annual data report would provide a more accurate picture of the deaths and injuries associated with these type of vehicles, rather just focusing solely on ATVs. So with that, I'm hopeful that the Commission will support adding this important project to the operating plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Kaye. Would someone second the amendment?
I second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Adler. Having heard a second, we will now move in consideration of Commissioner Kaye's amendment. Commissioners will ask their questions, and then we will come back to you at the end of the commissioners, unless any of the commissioners want to yield their 5-minute time for your answers. Each commissioner will have 5 minutes per round, and we'll have multiple rounds if necessary. And I will begin the questions and the comments on Commissioner Kaye's amendment. I, in principle, do not disagree, number one, with transparency, number two, with reporting on the death and injuries related to ROVs. So in principle, I agree with it. I think that adding it to the ATV report could be difficult. I think probably the amount of staff time was underestimated. The ATV report is probably one of the most complex reports that we create here at the CPSC, so adding ROVs to that I think would probably take more staff time, more resources. However, and this is a drum that I have beat and will continue to beat, I think we need to upgrade the epidemiology reports to consider exposure. I think it's important for us to understand as an agency how we are doing, and the only way I think we will accurately know how we are doing and how we are affecting safety is if we look at products and we look at the exposure and what the market is doing out there. So while I will be voting against Commissioner Kaye's amendment to add ROVs to the ATV report, I think that this discussion will continue. I hope that I can get my colleagues' support for some exposure studies so that when we do issue these reports, they have meaning in terms of not only the number of injuries and deaths, but beyond that, what are the rates of those injuries and deaths. So I'm sorry I can't support this amendment, but I will continue to push for exposure studies to make our reports even more meaningful. Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I strongly support Commissioner Kaye's amendment. I think this is long overdue, and I'm embarrassed that I hadn't thought of including ROVs as part of our ATV report long ago. I think people know that the Commission came this close to developing a mandatory standard, and we were stopped by a rider to an appropriations bill in the Congress, and at the behest of the industry, which I find to be just in the abstract generally inappropriate to see. I realize Congress has an oversight function, but I think this wasn't necessarily exercising it in a particularly responsible way. The fact is that ROVs and ATVs together present very similar issues and very similar problems, and stability is a huge portion of that. I think Commissioner Kay accurately notes the expanded sales of ROVs, which is also, I believe, matched by a diminishing of sales of ATVs. So ROVs are rapidly moving into the market. I'm delighted to hear that the Chair supports the general notion of acquiring this kind of information and disseminating it to the public. I also have no particular concern about exposure studies done right. Too often in the past, exposure studies have been thrown out as an obstacle to action by the Commission because folks step in and say, give us information that they well know that we can't really obtain. But to the extent within a judgment call we can obtain exposure data, I'm fully in support of that notion. At any rate, I thank Commissioner Kay for his amendment, and I plan to support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Adler. Commissioner Biocco.
I also agree on the points that both of my colleagues have raised. First of all, I do think ROVs, the data associated with ROVs should also be included, and I query whether we should have two separate reports, one for ATVs and one for ROVs. I do also agree that more data is always appropriate, but from my understanding with staff briefings, in order for this data to actually be useful rather than just a number without any backing, we would need the exposure study. I do also agree with Commissioner Adler that that should never be an obstacle, any type of study. In fact, I think that exposure studies and having all the data is necessary in each and every instance. So as drafted, I cannot support it because I think it's incomplete, but from a conceptual point, I think we ought to work together to figure out a way to get this done.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Feldman.
Thank you. I would associate myself with the Chairman's comments, and in addition, I'm concerned that including ROV and ATV data together in a single study risks conflating two distinct product categories. And while I intend to vote no on the amendment, I do hope that we can continue this conversation to explore how we can continue to advance meaningful transparency at CPSC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues. I can count votes. I don't see this passing, but I'm going to take from that the positive, and it sounds like there is probably a consensus to figure out a way to move forward on this issue, and maybe by the mid-year we can come up with some framework that we could support where we could try to make progress on this. And whether it's one report, which from staff's perspective at first seemed to be less labor-intensive, or two reports, to me doesn't really matter. I think it's just important to work to get the public better informed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Kay. If there are no further questions from the Commission, we will proceed with the vote. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Kay?
Yes.
Commissioner Biocco?
On the amendment?
On the amendment?
No.
Commissioner Feldman?
I vote no.
And I vote no. The yeas are 2 and the nays are 3. The amendment by Commissioner Kay is not adopted. Are there any other additional amendments or motions before the Commission this
I
morning?
have a motion, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Kay, please proceed with your motion. I will give you 3 minutes to describe the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My motion is modest, and it relates to our ongoing safety work related to gates to protect children in home. And I mention it's modest because what I believe it would do is what the Commission really should have done a long time ago, and that is set a firm deadline for moving ahead with a notice of proposed rulemaking on gates and other enclosures. These are products that are relied on daily by many parents and caregivers to keep their children safe. This project is already listed as an NPR in the operating plan, so I'm not proposing to significantly change what staff already wants to do. I'm simply proposing a clear, pencils-down date for staff to send the package up. In my mind, there is no safety justification for further delay on issuing this NPR. As I mentioned at the briefing on the operating plan 2 weeks ago, staff has raised the issue of push-out forces in the ASTM meetings at various points over the last 3 years. Meanwhile, in 2016, the latest year for which complete data is available, there were an estimated 2,900 emergency department treated injuries associated with baby gates involving children younger than 5 years old. This is an increase from the previous year. 5 deaths occurred also between 2011 and 2014, again, the latest years that we have data for. To be clear, this is not a rulemaking that requires universal agreement on a voluntary standard. While that would certainly be nice, it appears that staff and the voluntary standards body are close to agreement on an adequate push-out performance standard. But that is also not what is required by Section 104 of the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. Under Section 104, Congress only required the Commission to, quote, consult, end quote, various stakeholders and, quote, examine and assess the effectiveness of, end quote, any relevant voluntary standard, and promulgate a rule that is substantially the same as that voluntary standard or more stringent than the voluntary standard if the Commission determines that more stringent standards would further reduce the risk of injury. My understanding is that staff has done just that and has actually gone well beyond the statutory requirements and is a recommended approach that would further reduce the risk of injury beyond the existing voluntary standard. Therefore, we should move forward and publish that approach for public comment without delay. And that would just be an NPR, not a final rule. We would have an opportunity after comment to make any additional necessary changes. So with that in mind, I move the following. No later than 180 days after the Commission approves the fiscal year 2019 operating plan, staff shall provide to the Commission for its consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking proposing a mandatory consumer product safety standard for gates and other enclosures under and consistent with Section 104 of the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Kaye. Is there a second?
Second.
Having heard a second to Commissioner Kaye's amendment, we will now proceed with consideration of his amendment. His motion. Commissioners will ask their questions, and then we'll come back at the end of the questions to Commissioner Kaye for any comments or any time he would like, any questions he may have to answers or comments. I will begin the round of question and comments. I am optimistic on this particular 104. I think staff has worked extremely hard to get us where we are. We've seen very recently a lot of progress in this Voluntary Standards Committee because of staff's creative and willingness to step outside of the box and think of something different. So I am optimistic that within the next 6 months we will see an NPR, and so I will not be supporting Commissioner Kaye's motion because I think that staff has this under control. I don't think that there is any feet dragging on the part of industry. I think there was a little bit of an obstacle, and fortunately staff overcame that obstacle with some creative thinking. Commissioner Adler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to say this is an extremely painful comment for me to make because I really admire what Commissioner Kaye has done on this, and I completely support his notion that these things, unlike some of the other durable infant products, really present a very, very serious hazard. And I think the staff is aware of that, and I commend the staff for working on this. I have every expectation that the staff, in fact, will get an NPR to us within 180 days. And I urge the staff to do that. My concern arises from having lived through a situation where we've put a deadline in and the staff just hasn't been able to meet it. And I lived with that on table saws, for example, for about 1.5 years. So that you can put in a provision like this, but I think it sets expectations that may not be met, but also at some point staff may say, we're going to have to stop doing something that's really important in order to finish this deadline, whereas if we had an extra 60 days or an extra 30 days, we could do that. So I have consulted extensively with staff about this, and staff uniformly has said, please don't tie our hands beyond what we've committed to, which is to do this NPR within the fiscal year. So it is with extreme reluctance and pain that I oppose this amendment.
Thank you. Commissioner Biocco.
So I think that Commissioner Kaye's motion or amendment should be heard on the very point that it seeks to bring to light, and on that point I agree. The pace, being a new person here, the pace of the government is not something I've been celebrating yet. So I appreciate that Commissioner Kaye is trying to move the ball forward here. Staff, however, tells me they are on track. And I don't want to be in a position to tell staff by X day you have to have this done, and that may cause our engineers to rush to an end that could be handled a little bit better. So I'm going to vote no. However, I do want the staff to hear that I think there are, I venture to say at least 3 so far, that want things to move and stay on track and to have deliverables in a reasonable period of time. And I encourage staff to please keep that in mind and keep us up to date and just get these things done so that we can deliver them to the American people.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Feldman.
Thank you. I do think that this is a serious issue, and I'm glad to hear that staff is working diligently to address this product hazard. I understand, however, based on my conversations with staff, that they do oppose this deadline, and therefore I respectfully must oppose this amendment, but think this is a good discussion and look forward to seeing this come through in final form in short order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kaye.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues. Obviously, the point of offering an amendment like this is to help children, not to hurt commissioners, so I'm saddened to hear that this causes so much pain for my colleague. But I do take again the positive from the comments of my colleagues that share the desire to see this kept on its time track, and I hope that we'll be able to do that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Having heard no further questions to Commissioner Kaye's motion, we will now take the vote. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Kaye?
Yes.
Commissioner Bielko?
No.
Commissioner Feldman?
No.
And I vote no. The yeas are 1, the nays are 4. The motion by Commissioner Kaye is defeated. Are there any other amendments or motions here this morning? Having heard no further amendments or motions, we will now turn to consideration of the fiscal year 2019 operating plan as amended here this morning. Each commissioner will have 10 minutes for closing remarks after conclusion of the vote. But at this point, I just would ask my colleagues if they have any other comments that they would like to make with regards to the operating plan. Commissioner Adler?
No.
Commissioner Kaye?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Bielko?
No.
Commissioner Feldman? Having heard no further comments, I will now call the vote. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Kaye?
No.
Commissioner Bielko?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Feldman?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. The yeas are 4, the nays are 1. The fiscal year 2019 operating plan, as amended here this morning, has been adopted. We will now have up to 10 minutes per commissioner for any closing remarks that they might have, and I will begin with my closing remarks. Let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the staff for all of their efforts in putting together the FY 2019 operating plan. In particular, Mary Boyle, Dwayne Ray, Monica Summit, George Borlace, Jay Hoffman, James Baker, and the Office of Financial Management. Distilling everything that this agency does into a single document is not an easy task at all, and I truly appreciate all of the time, the attention, the work across the directorates that went into developing this year's operating plan. I am proud of the job that was done by staff, and I'm even more proud of the course we have laid out for the Consumer Product Safety Commission during this next fiscal year. As I mentioned at the beginning of the hearing, we have just welcomed our 5th commissioner. A new group of commissioners with the same mission of keeping consumers safe from unreasonable risks of injury or death. I soundly reject any hint or suggestion that safety is in jeopardy because there is a new commission. We remain the Consumer Product Safety Commission. We still have the same responsibilities to carry out, the same laws, and the same regulations to enforce. As with any change in an administration, it's reasonable to expect that there will be different ideas, approaches, and policies. How we accomplish what we all set out to do and what I know are all of our mutual goals, how we accomplish them may look different, but the goal of safety always remains here at the agency. While we commissioners may not always agree on policy or what approach to take, I believe we all share the same purpose, to keep the consumer safe. We will have policy disagreements, no doubt, but I hope that we will find ways to agree. And when we cannot, in the words of my friend Commissioner Adler, we can find ways to disagree without being disagreeable. Safety is not and must not be a political issue. I think this operating plan is a case in point. We did not agree on everything, but we found areas to compromise on, adding some fine points to staff's already solid proposal. The ops plan is a robust and accurate portrayal of the staff work we will conduct in the next fiscal year, work that truly enhances consumer safety. This FY2000 operating plan reflects my priorities, the same priorities that I've had since I arrived here at the Commission in 2013. I believe we are most effective when carrying out our safety mission when we focus on identifying the highest priority risks and emerging hazards, when we improve our import surveillance, we enhance our agency's data capabilities, and we strengthen our collaboration, education, and outreach. Let me just talk about those briefly. Risk. Start with risk. I believe we carry out our mission most effectively by ensuring that our resources are dedicated to the highest priority risk and that we focus on emerging technologies and how the application of such technologies could promote or harm safety. With the advancement of new technologies and innovations, the consumer product safety landscape is changing, and it's rapidly changing. The types of products, how these products are powered, and where these products are purchased is evolving rapidly. And it is therefore critical that CPSC remain highly engaged on issues related to the Internet of Things, connected products, lithium-ion batteries, and e-commerce. On import surveillance, one of the best ways to keep unsafe products out of the consumer's hands is to keep them from entering the United States marketplace altogether. I will work to ensure that CPSC remains vigilant in monitoring the safety of imported products by continuing our excellent work relationship with CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, as well as the ongoing improvements to our import surveillance program. On data, CPSC is a data-driven agency. I will work to expand the sources from which we receive data, as well as the type of data we receive. Additionally, it is important to focus on improving our capabilities to analyze that data so it can be used to identify and assess emerging hazards, inform compliance decisions and voluntary standards work, and be utilized for rulemaking when appropriate. Sound science and reliable data is critical to our mission of safety, and during my tenure, I hope to help further modernize the CPSC. On collaboration, education, and outreach, CPSC has jurisdiction over 15,000 types of consumer products. We are a small agency with an extremely large, important mission. It's unrealistic to think that we can execute our mission effectively without collaborating with all of our stakeholders. I will continue to work with the agency's stakeholders and engagement with manufacturers, retailers, consumer advocates, other government agencies, academia, and other stakeholders. Education and outreach should be an important focal point for the agency. Increasing consumer awareness of potential hazards as well as publicizing safety solutions through information and educational campaigns such as our Pool Safely, Anchor It, and Safe Sleep campaigns will have a positive effect. As we speak, Hurricane Michael is about to make landfall in the United States. Across this agency and across this country, CPSC staff is working aggressively with others to raise the awareness that hurricane and the dangers associated with the hurricanes. Education is not exclusive to consumers, though. Part of our mission, I believe, safety should be better education of the regulated community on how to best comply with our rules and regulations. If we can inform industry as to our interpretation of our safety requirements, best practices, the importance of managing supply chains, and being engaged with CPSC, we can help design safety into products. In addition to these 4 priority areas, I'm eager to see the fruits of labor, of staff's labor, on the issues of furniture tip-overs and portable generators. These are highly complex and oftentimes controversial issues that we will continue to vigorously address. Staff is doing significant work in both areas, and I'm hopeful that their efforts will result in safer standards, whether they be voluntary or mandatory, as their work ultimately informs both options. Recall effectiveness is another long-standing challenging issue here at the agency. Our staff will continue to dedicate time and resources to find more effective and efficient recall processes that inform the consumers of unsafe products. There is unfortunately no quick fix to remedying the problem. It will take time, but this is a priority issue for me and CPSC staff. As mentioned, scientific integrity, data, and sound process is paramount in all that we do, so I am pleased to see these areas highlighted in the operating plan. It's important that we continue to enhance our own data and technology to keep up with the changing times, and in particular, I'm pleased to see us taking a critical look at saferproducts.gov. In addition, staff will be looking at other programs and processes to ensure that their execution is efficient and effective. I believe that the future of the Consumer Product Safety Commission is bright. Our mission remains crystal clear, and this operating plan is reflective of that. It prioritizes the key areas of risk, emerging hazards, data, import surveillance, and standards development. It strives for regulatory excellence, strengthens our agency, and enhances consumer safety. Again, my sincere thanks to all of the staff and to my colleagues and to my staff for all of the work that went into this operating plan, and I believe what is a successful morning here this morning at the CPSC. Thank you. Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't have very extensive remarks, but I did want to make 1 or 2 quick observations. First of all, we are in an era of hyperpartisanship, and I hope we can avoid that at this commission, and I think we have. And it's been a delight to get to know my colleagues Dana and Peter, and I've known that Acting Chairman Burkle has been dedicated to the idea of having civility, treating staff and colleagues and outsiders with respect. And I think you've done a marvelous job in that respect. One of the hallmarks when I was in the majority, which was for many, many years, was I always went out of my way, at least as I felt I did, to treat people who were not in the majority with the same respect that I'd like to be treated when I'm in the minority, to listen to them, to try to accommodate their concerns as much as possible, and to work collaboratively. I think we're there. I think that this commission is going to set a great example for some of the other regulatory bodies where things are not so full of harmony. Now, that is not to say we will always agree, as Acting Chair Burkle said. In fact, I seem to remember when I introduced her at some function, and I said, occasionally after a vote, I will look at her, and she will look at me, and we'll both be saying, how can somebody that I like and respect so much be so damn wrong? But I think that's the nature of a commission, a bipartisan commission, that we do have our differences, but two things. One, we try our best to work out compromises, and I cannot thank my colleagues enough for their willingness to compromise. I know my amendment is not the way they would have phrased it if they'd had complete control over it, but that's the nature of being in a collegial decision-making body. I also want to particularly commend the chair for the way she has dealt with staff. I remember reading an article years ago. In fact, I remember twice when administrations were on their way out, and the Post went and interviewed the administration officials and said, what's the biggest surprise you had when you worked for government? Invariably, they said, the exceptional, dedicated staff that we worked with. We just never understood how talented and how committed the people were that we work with. And boy, is that the case at this agency. We are a very technical agency. We are data-driven. And every day I go out and I see staff, and I'm so proud to be associated and affiliated with you. So first of all, thank you for being so good about treating staff with respect and dignity, and thank the staff for being so talented and working so hard with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kaye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank staff for their work on this year's operating plan. As I mentioned earlier, in particular, the assistance from the Executive Director's Office that was provided over the past week. Thank you for that. I also would like to thank my own office staff, Janafong Swamidas, Jonathan Midget, and Allison Steinley for their great work. They spent a lot of time and put in a lot of hours working the halls, and I appreciate the other offices as well for their accommodations. I believe that the operating plan is a vehicle for progress in advancing safety, saving lives, and preventing injuries. That is this agency's mandate, and that is why working here is so meaningful. Although it is fair to say that this year's operating plan does not reflect each of our specific priorities, there is a lot of good in it. I just did not find it good enough. I've tried to work within the framework of what has been presented to the Commission and offered amendments with three main goals in mind. One, increasing the transparency and accountability of the CPSC to the American public, given our vital mission to keep people safe. Two, measuring the agency's progress with explicit deliverables and milestones and clear communication of our plans, our strategies, our goals as we pursue this important mission. And three, enhancing our risk assessment and policy decisions with better data and information. While I'm disappointed that we cannot reach agreement on all of these issues that are important to us, particularly with respect to the amendment that I offered on adding ROV data, I am grateful to my colleagues, particularly to Acting Chairman Burkle, for putting together the manager's amendment in the spirit of compromise. I'm also glad that we were able to reach agreement on some of these issues. I also want to be clear that my vote was not a reflection of staff's work. In fact, my vote was because I think we are not giving staff enough credit. I believe that there is more that our talented staff can be doing to advance our safety mission with the extremely limited resources that we have. We can and should sharpen our hazard identification data sets to enhance the speed with which we find potential problems in the marketplace. But we also need to strike a careful balance between rigorous data collection and delay and over-analysis. I cannot support delaying rules or protracted technical reviews when the hazard mitigation strategies are already well known, they're available, and there are no legal impediments to moving forward. And in lay terms, that means when we can solve a problem and it's solvable, we should go ahead and solve it. I'm hopeful that the CPSC will continue to aim to be fully transparent to the public on its progress on advancing safety. And most importantly, I hope we can reach a little bit more for safety, push for it a little bit more, and dream a little bit bigger for a safer world. We are capable of that, and the public is counting on us to do it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Kaye. Commissioner Biocco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peter, welcome. I know you've only been here a few days, but the Commission is already a better place. And thank you to my other colleagues throughout this process, which I found to be very dense and complicated. I've had the opportunity to speak with each one of you on many occasions, and I've learned a lot from each and every one of you. And frankly, it was fun. If that's possible, to do an operating plan and have some fun. But as long as we are working together, I think it's always going to be a better document, if you will, or more importantly, a better program and a better set of goals. So I thank you for all that you taught me throughout this process, and I look forward to continuing these dialogues. Thank you to the staff, doing an amazing job, and particularly to my team, Michael Asplin and Dottie Yar. Anything that I do well here, they have a hand in it. So I really appreciate what they do, and I agree with Commissioner Kaye. The entire staff, the entire Commissioner's offices, our teams are amazing, and they're doing a lot of work behind the scenes and putting up with, do this, do that, and they shouldn't be overlooked because they're working really hard, and they're very, very impressive. I am pleased to have voted for the fiscal year 2019 operating plan as amended. I think it does reflect many of the priorities that we have, and I do think it gives us the opportunity very broadly to fine-tune some of our goals as we go along. I am extremely appreciative that we have the data collection process that we have now, but I do recognize and have noted in my few times up here that I see challenges, and I do see some areas that need to be not only supplemented but addressed, and I'm looking forward to working on that, because I think that's where we need to start. Everything we do is based on data, and some of the disagreements that, and I say disagreements lightly, that we had on some of the amendments were based, frankly, on data, how we're going to collect it, what it represents, and making sure that we're all on the same page, and I think that's very important. I think we can always strive to do more. I think we can always strive to streamline the process. I think we can move a little quicker. I think that I look forward to working with the staff to have additional deliverables that are that get out to the American people, because sometimes I think that doing nothing or trying to accomplish it all is not in the best interest of all the stakeholders. Let's get to the things that we all can agree on, that we know are solvable and are good moves. And let's move that forward. I recognize that the CPSC has a very limited budget. I do think that there are opportunities to do some of our things a little bit more effectively and a little bit more efficiently, and that may require a little bit of growing pains, but it's to the end game. I think each one of us up here has indicated that we have a strong desire to see that happen. And I am impressed, as Commissioner Adler raised, how well everybody worked together, and I appreciate everybody making the adjustments at the last minute to even accommodate, my point of view. So I appreciate that, and it was great. As I stated in the opening briefing, I think our state and local program is a great resource. It is understated and it's underrepresented, and I hope that the operating plan gives us an opportunity to expand that further. I think it has a big return for the small amount of investment that the budget has in that program. I also am very focused on e-commerce, and particularly the concern that we don't have enough resources to address the rapid pace that products or non-compliant products are coming into the United States, and I think that's something we definitely need to work on. I think our inspectors at the ports are our first line of defense against the harmful products that are coming into this country, and we need more personnel, we need better technology, and we need more expansion and more cooperation and corroboration with other agencies to reach that goal, because we can do it, it's out there, we just need to tap into those resources. Thank you again. Come see me at any time. I'm open to hearing from staff at any time for ideas that you have that can make the place better. Just come in. You don't have to have an appointment, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Feldman.
Thank you. And I would want to take this opportunity to to express my gratitude to the chairman and my fellow commissioners for the warm welcome that I've received here at CPSC. Today is my third day on the job, and we've wasted no time getting down to business. But I'm pleased to be voting today on an operating plan that sets out clear priorities for the agency, among other things, to focus resources on the highest priority consumer product safety risks, and to emphasize collaboration, education, and outreach by engaging all stakeholders. I am impressed with the work that staff has done putting together this document, and also with how my colleagues have worked together to reach bipartisan consensus on a plan that reflects priorities from each of the 5 commissioners. I look forward to working with everyone to find common ground to address these important safety issues. The final product today is a forward-looking document in many respects. Before joining CPSC, I stated my belief that the agency can do more to address the role of online platforms and to improve the quality of the data on which the agency most frequently relies. With respect to online platforms, I'm pleased that among the FY19 priority activities included in this ops plan is an evaluation of e-commerce platforms to analyze how to engage in effective marketplace monitoring for emerging hazards related to e-commerce. With respect to data quality, I am pleased that the plan seeks to improve the Office of Hazard Identification's role in data analysis and expanding the data analytics capabilities using advanced software tools and seeking additional data inputs, including, for instance, urgent care centers. I'll keep my remarks brief, but I wanted to close by thanking our dedicated staff for preparing this document. I know you all worked hard on this, and it's reflected in what we've finally agreed to today. And moving forward, I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and my sincere appreciation to all of my colleagues for collegiality and willing to compromise and in moving the operating plan forward. I again want to thank all of the staff, not only the staff that was here today, but the staff who presented last week during our briefing. I want to thank the Office of the Secretary, Office of the Executive Director, our General Counsel, Patty Hands, and Rock Grant, who is, as per usual, behind the scenes making all of this run, and I want to thank him for all of his efforts to facilitate this morning's hearing. This concludes the public meeting of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and I again thank all of you for participating, both here in person and via webinar, and I will adjourn the meeting.